How do you smoke jerky in the Masterbuilt Electric Smoker? That's coming up in this video. First things first, we need to trim up whatever meat we're using for the jerky. So let's take a look at this chunk of meat that I have. This is a 10-pound top round roast. So a lot of you will probably get a smaller roast than this, but this is what I got from the butcher. The first thing you're gonna wanna do is remove any of the extra fat on top or any of the silver skin. So you just want to sort of wiggle your knife under this silver skin here and then try to just lift it up. You can use some paper towel, just take some here, and you can get a grip on it. And then you can sometimes pull it off like that, but most of the time it's just easier to use your knife to lift it all off. You want to try to get the leanest cut of meat possible. You don't want to get something like a chuck roast that has a lot of connective tissue and fat. You want to try to get something from probably the top or the bottom round. Sometimes it's called London broil at the store, depending on what region you're in. But you can see that there's not a lot of fat in between these muscle fibers, and that's perfect for jerky because we want our teeth to be able to pull them apart really easily. And if you get a lot of fat, this fat sort of gets really hard and it can get rancid and it's just chewy and not very good in jerky. The same thing goes for this silver skin. It's the same kind of concept. So we're gonna try to remove as much of that as possible. And now, because this is such a large piece of meat, we're gonna start seaming apart the muscle groups. We want to have one muscle group per piece of jerky. So for example, you wouldn't want to cut a jerky slice that's connected just by connective tissue and there's a long strip like that because it's gonna be chewy and it's not gonna be very good. So we wanna separate these muscle groups. If you just get a roast that's just one muscle, then you won't have to do this. But again, because this is so big, I am needing to trim this a bit more than I usually would need to. Now, this has been defrosted, so you'll notice that as I get deeper, there's a lot more frozen meat in the middle because I haven't defrosted it all the way yet, which is fine because it'll be easier to cut when I slice it into jerky slices. All right, we'll put this to the side. And as you can see, there's quite a few trimmings that I have just from trimming off the silver skin. And if you have a dog that's on a raw diet, this is really good to feed to that dog. It's still got a lot of good meat on it. Or you can just put it in a stock if you make beef stock yourself. It's not very good for grind in most cases because it has a lot of connective tissue and fat and the silver skin, which is not great for making ground beef, but great for dogs, great for stock. So try to save it if you can and make the most use of it because you paid for it at the end of the day and you want to respect the animal. So it's best to try to see what you can do with it. Now we've got a pretty lean cut of meat here that I've trimmed up. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the bottom deflection plate, the grease plate from the Masterbuilt Electric Smoker. A lot of you will have something that looks like this in your Masterbuilt smoker. Maybe some models don't, but what I like to do is you can see if you look close, there's a little lip, and I use that lip to rest my long knife blade against while I'm cutting so I can cut thin, even strips of jerky. So what I'll do is I'll set this down on the cutting board so you can see it, and I'll put the lean cut of meat down, facing down. And now I'm going to take a very long blade. I use this for trimming brisket, and it's good because you can rest it right against these edges here, and it leaves a very small gap. So now you're gonna push down just slightly right on top of the meat and try to apply even pressure. And then we're gonna slowly move our knife blade along and just cut this slice here. All right, now if we take this off, you can see that it made a super thin slice, almost like we just sliced it on a meat slicer, and that's what you want. You want really, really thin slices of jerky. If you don't have this deflection plate, or if you like your cuts a bit thicker, then you can just slice it by hand, but I like to have it as thin as possible, and this is one of the best ways to do it. So after we've cut that slice off. We're gonna put it to the side. And we'll just keep doing the same thing. So put the big piece of meat onto the rack again. And we'll just continue slicing. If you have a really nice knife, this isn't a nice knife, it's just something that I buy every couple of months from Amazon, then you might want to protect the edges of it by putting some masking tape along the edges of this drip deflection pan just to protect the edges from scratching. But in this case, it's not really scratching it up too much and I don't really care about this knife, so that's what I'm going to do. Again, we're just putting some even pressure on top just to keep the meat down so it cuts evenly. And then we're just doing some slow knife strokes as even as possible. And you have to move the pressure of your hand as you move the knife. So you always want the pressure sort of right in front of where the knife is cutting. The larger the roast you're working with, the easier it is to cut because it's just a lot easier to handle and there's a lot more weight weighing down the meat on the bottom when you're doing this. So we'll move that up again. And again, you can see that it's made a very thin slice of beef. You can see how thin that is, and you can imagine that once this loses a bunch of moisture, it's going to turn into some really good jerky. So if you really want to get next level on your jerky making skills, then you can slice it against the grain. So in that case, I would just flip this meat probably like 90 degrees and cut it against the grain. But when I'm cutting it this thin, I find that it helps to cut with the grain because it just holds it together a lot better. I've cut it against the grain this thin before and it kind of falls apart a little bit. So use your discretion. Every time I've done this, it's turned out great. So this is the best way I've found to do it. Put that to the side. Okay, there we go. So I'm pretty happy with that now. I've got enough jerky strips. What I'm gonna do now is I'm going to transfer the strips over to the cutting board and I'm gonna cut them into smaller, more evenly spaced strips. So I'll just put this out of the way for now. And we'll take our jerky strips. I'll just take a handful here. And what we wanna do is just make sure they're uniform. So this one you can see is pretty wide. It's more square shaped. So what I want to do is just have thinner strips. So I'm just going to cut this into some nice strips. All right, now we're going to measure these jerky strips just to see how much we have. So I'll just transfer these to a bowl here. And we'll grab this scale. It's already been preset to account for the weight of the bowl. So we've got about let's call it 2.5 pounds of jerky here. So I'll set that to the side. And based on that, about 2 pounds, I'll make a recipe for a marinade right now. So put that bowl there. I'm just gonna take these gross gloves off. The first thing I'm gonna use is this Kikkoman teriyaki sauce. I use this for stir fries and marinades. And I'm gonna do 3 tablespoons of this. There we go. Next up is some soy sauce. I'm gonna use just some basic dark soy sauce. And again, I'll do 3 tablespoons. And now we're gonna put some Worcestershire sauce in, 3 tablespoons as well. This is gonna add some nice umami flavor to the marinade, basically savory flavor. It's actually really interesting. I just watched a video on how this is made. They ferment fish and onions for like years in order to make this. So if you are interested in checking that out, Worcestershire sauce is in a lot of food. So it's a very interesting process how it gets made. So we'll do 3 tablespoons. 1, 2, 3. Put that to the side. And now I'm going to add some chili powder, and I'll just do a teaspoon of chili powder just to add a little bit of kick to it. Add that into the marinade, put that to the side. All right, now we'll mix it up. So we mix up our marinade. Now with this much soy sauce and teriyaki sauce and Worcestershire sauce, there's already enough salt in the liquid that you don't need to add extra salt. You don't want to make the jerky way too salty. There's more than enough salt in here. And this might not look like a lot of liquid, but it's actually quite a bit, and all that meat is going to soak it all up. A lot of times people will make marinades that, you know, they'll make like a whole gallon of marinade and then they'll have to throw it all out at the end of the day. So you might as well just preserve your ingredients and make less of it. So I am going to put a glove on here so I can handle the meat. And what I'll do is I'll add the strips in one at a time, like this. We'll just line the bottom. All right, so that's one layer. And then I'll add a little bit of this marinade in. Because if you just put all of a big clump of jerky into this thing and then you pour the marinade on top, it's gonna be really hard to get that marinade into the center of that pile. So I like to layer it on and add it gradually so that it can soak into all of the surfaces of this jerky. So we'll lay on another layer here. Just kind of until you can't really see the marinade anymore, until it's completely covered. There we go. We'll add some more. And we'll continue to layer this on just like I did before. And you can see that by doing it this way, you get a lot more exposure to all that marinade and it's getting onto every surface. So you can poke that down, press that down so that all the marinade is seeping upwards. All right, and now we'll put our last layer of sauce, or marinade rather, on top of this. And the last step is we're just gonna press it down. So we're pressing the meat down, and that is surfacing all the marinade and getting it all into all the different channels. So you can see that now everything is nice and evenly coated. And in this glass container, you can kind of see that everything is marinated all throughout and every layer has it. There's no areas that the marinade's not getting to. So now we're gonna cover this up. We're gonna put it in the fridge for 4 hours to marinate. You can leave this to marinate up to overnight and it will just get better over time. But in this case, I don't have all day to make this jerky, so I'm just gonna marinate it quickly, and that should be enough time to do some wet brining action and get all those flavors penetrating into the meat. All right, guys, the jerky is done marinating now, so I'm gonna open it up, and if you take a look at it, you can see that it's sucked up a lot of that moisture, and there's not a lot of extra marinade left. So we'll take this out of the bowl here, and we'll just lay it down on some paper towels. You want to remove as much moisture from the jerky as possible before we put it into the Masterbuilt, because the whole point of jerky is to dehydrate it and remove that moisture. So we just added a whole bunch of moisture with this marinade, so now we have to get it out. Okay, now we're going to take some more paper towel and we're going to pat the top dry. So we'll just pat this down. You can see that it's going to suck up a lot of that moisture, and that's good because it's going to reduce the amount of time that we need to smoke it in the Masterbuilt Electric Smoker, because we're removing a whole bunch of moisture. Okay, that's probably good enough. Don't have to go too crazy. Now I'm gonna take my one glove off here so I can handle this, but I've got a container full of really coarse ground black pepper, and I'm going to spread it on top of the jerky just to add some extra flavor and a little bit of heat to it. I got this idea from T. Roy Cook's channel. I'm gonna link it above if you wanna check him out. He's got some really good stuff. So Let's start sprinkling this pepper on. Oh man, this is gonna be good. All right, now we're gonna flip everything over and we're gonna get the other side. Flip these over. Wow, that smells good. You can really smell the teriyaki. You can smell the pepper. It's really good, actually. This brings back memories. I used to go on really long military exercises in Wainwright, Alberta, up in Canada, back when I was in the military. And we used to always make a long trip to the Canex, which was basically where you go and you buy sort of provisions. They always had this local jerky for sale there, and I used to spend all my money on this jerky because it was so good. When you're out there in the cold weather and you're on an exercise for months, then this jerky really makes a big difference because it's way better than the military rations they used to give you. So good memories. All right, now's the fun part. It was fun for me anyway. So take one of the Masterbuilt racks. We just got a normal rack from the Masterbuilt here, and we're gonna orient it so the lip is facing the right direction. So when it slides into the Masterbuilt, you want this lip at the back. And I'm going to prop this thing up with a couple textbooks because that's what I have right now. So got some of my wife's vegan cooking textbooks here. This is what I have. So I'll put that there, and I'll take the other one and set it up like this. Okay, now I've got a bunch of bamboo skewers. They're heavy duty bamboo skewers that I've been soaking for a couple hours just to give them some added flexibility. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna start taking jerky strips and sliding them on just like that. So I'm sliding them on. I'll slide another one on at a thick part so it doesn't slide off, and then I'll go all the way back to right about there, and I'll slide that one just so they have a little bit, maybe like a 1/4 inch of distance between them so that we can get some nice air circulation, just so they're not touching each other. And I'm just continuing to do that. All right, there we go. So I've got this skewer with some space in between the jerky, and you can hold a lot more jerky in the Masterbuilt by doing it this way, because now we're going to attach this to the actual tray here. So we'll just go in with one of the pointy ends, and because we've soaked this bamboo skewer, it's a lot easier to kind of manipulate and bend. Okay, there we go. So now we've got it sort of bent onto the Masterbuilt rack like that. And you wouldn't think that this is very sturdy, but this is actually locked in pretty good. I can't really move it that easily. So get pretty heavy duty bamboo skewers for this. If you get lighter ones, then it might be a little bit more difficult. The second way you can do it is, I'll just turn this around here, and you can take a skewer, and we'll just do it like we did before. Okay, so we've got another skewer. I put less on them this time because with this method, we're just going to sort of lower them onto the Masterbuilt rack here. And you can see that you're just sort of feeding them in between the grates. And then you just rest the skewer like that. And all of a sudden, they're hanging down and you're getting a lot more on there, and you don't have to bend the skewer or anything like that. So either method works, depends on what you want to do, depends on what's easiest for you. All right, so these jerky strips are all hanging, and we've got a nice setup to put right into the Masterbuilt Electric Smoker. You can see that there's a lot more jerky here than you could actually fit onto the racks alone. And I find this way is better because you get more smoke in between the jerky sticks, and you don't get the imprints of the rack where the grill grates are going on the jerky. This is a good way of doing it, and I'll put this in the Masterbuilt right now. I'm gonna preheat the Masterbuilt Electric Smoker to 275. I'll do a quick burn for about 10 minutes just to start that smoke rolling, and then I'll ratchet it way down to around 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I'll leave it there for about 4 hours. I figure this will take about 4 hours. It might take earlier though, so I'll check on it after about 2 hours and see how it's coming along. Some people like their jerky a little bit more crispy, so it'll take longer, and some people like it a little bit more chewy. So in that case, you'll just want to check it every few hours and see how it tastes and just play it by ear. If you guys like smoking stuff in your Masterbuilt as much as I do, then check this video out. This is where I smoke some Spam. So it's a bit of a unique recipe, just like this beef jerky recipe. And if you want to get the most out of your Masterbuilt Electric Smoker, really recommend checking that out. So click on that and I'll see you in the next video. But first, let's take a bite of this jerky. Just kind of snaps off, lots of pepper. That's some good stuff.